Just looking around, seeing who's in the, here we go. People are coming in. Thank you, everyone. Coming at you from St. Paul on a gray, rainy day. But this day last year was completely covered in snow, so I'll take rain today. We are here with a superb collection of Midwestern sci-fi, cli-fi, literary fiction authors who have one thing in common. They all speculate on alternative versions of America and beyond to imagine where the future might take us. Before we get started though, I'm going to let you know that next week we have another event called the Elements of Excellent Book Clubs. It features another powerhouse group of authors, Jacqueline Machard, Adriana Trigiani, Sharon Cameron, Carrie Marr, and 3D Umergar. So please join us on Thursday, October 28th for that. And then we have a newly announced Scholastic After Party. It's hot off the presses. We don't have a description yet, but it's Thursday, November 16th. And it also involves goodies. So as soon as registration goes up, we'll make sure everyone knows how to get involved in that. While you're at the Heartland website, please check out the amazing book room. We have to give major props to Kate Scott for setting up an amazing book room with links to so many titles based on where the author is from, the publisher, Edelweiss, and if a rep has presented the book in a rep picks video, the link takes you directly to that specific title. So you can just cruise around and get little rep picks presentations for all of these books. And today's authors are all there in the book room, so please do check it out. And without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our host, who I was very fortunate to have met while putting this panel together. Sanina L. Clark is the editor of the acclaimed titles Out of Salem by Hal Shreve and All City by Alex DeFrancesco. They're currently an instructor at Writopia Lab, a contributing writer for Publishers Weekly and A Gathering of Tribes magazine, and the editor of the Black Dawn series under AK Press, a speculative novella series which launched fall 2021 and features Grievers by Adrienne Maree Brown. Their bookcase is filled with YA, fantasy, sci-fi, mystery, horror, plays, and queer literature. So thank you so much, Sanina, for joining us, and you can go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you, Carrie, for introducing me. Yeah, so we have a wonderful set of authors today, all talking about speculative fiction and speculative worlds in their different respects. And so we have Rebecca Sherm here. She is the author of 2 novels, A House Between Earth and the Moon, which will be published in March 2022, and Unbecoming from 2015. She lives in California with her family. Some of her favorite things unrelated to books and writing are praying mantises, lentils, the Seek app, and the Drink Corpse Reviver #2. Sequoia Nagamotsu is a Japanese-American writer and managing editor of Psychopomp magazine, an online quarterly dedicated to innovative prose. Originally from Hawaii in the San Francisco Bay Area, he holds an MFA in creative writing from Southern Illinois University and a BA in anthropology from Grinnell College. His work has appeared in such publications as Conjunctions, The Southern Review, ZYZZYVA, A Fairy Tale Review, and Tin House. Maurice Bratis is the author of the novella Buffalo Soldier from Tor.com, the Breton Court trilogy, Pimp My Airship, and The Usual Suspects. He leads a series of Afrofuturist workshops. Broaddus is a middle school teacher and community organizer from Indianapolis, Indiana, where he lives with his wife and 2 sons. John Scalzi is one of the most popular science fiction authors of his generation. His debut, Olds Man War, won him the John W. Campbell Award for Best New Writer. His New York Times bestsellers include The Last Colony, Fuzzy Nation, Red Shirts, which won the 2013 Hugo Award for Best Novel, and 2020's The Last Embarrass. Dan Chaon is the author of 6 previous books, including Ill Will, a national bestseller named one of the 10 best books of 2017 by Publishers Weekly. Other works include the short story collection Stay Awake 2012, a finalist for the Story Prize, the national bestseller Await Your Reply, and Among the Missing, a finalist for the National Book Award. Adrienne Maree Brown is a writer living in Detroit. She is a student of the works of Octavia E. Butler and Ursula K. Le Guin. Grievers is her first novella. Her previous books include Octavia's Brood, Emergent Strategy, Pleasure Activism, and We Will Not Cancel Us. Her visionary fiction has appeared in the Funambulous, Harvard Design Review, and Dark Mountain. So whenever the authors are ready, can you each go around and tell us really quickly a little bit about your book? We can start with you, Rebecca.
Okay, A House Between Earth and the Moon is about 2033 and how it looks from the ground and how it looks from space. In this case, space is a private space station that's a bolt hole for billionaires to flee climate change and the not quite ordinary people who have been hired to build it out. There's Tess, a young social psychologist who believes that she can work for big tech and still use her powers for good. There's a biochemist dad trying to make super algae to save the world. His daughter, Mary Agnes, this teenage girl whose voice felt so tender that it hurt me to write her, and sister tycoons of this giant telecom who own the station and all of the technology that runs our lives and their lives. And a mother who feels ill-equipped to raise her children in 2033. It's really about power and technology and deception. What happens when you consent to experimentation and don't realize just how many experiments are going on. In terms of comparison, I usually struggle with this, but this time I'm really going to give it a try. It's like if Ann Patchett and Margaret Atwood were holding hands and making plans together on a space shuttle without realizing that there's someone else in the captain's chair, and then the chair slowly turns around and it's Ling Ma. That's my book.
I love that. I love that last piece of the description.
Thank
you. Sequoia, let's hear from you.
All right. So for fans of kaleidoscopic work like Cloud Atlas, How High We Go in the Dark is pitched as Station 11 meets the work of Ted Chiang. So it's a literary speculative novel that has been over 10 years in the making. I'm tired. Folks like Alan Moore of Watchmen calls it haunting and luminous. Chloe Benjamin of The Immortalists calls it sprawling epic. The novel is a multi-generational journey about holding on to memory and embracing the possibilities for life in the aftermath of a tragedy. The novel kicks off in Siberia in 2030, where scientists have unearthed the 30,000-year-old remains of a girl who may not be completely human, along with an unusual virus. So the following chapters travel through generations and locales, following an intricately linked characters who navigate what comes to be known as the Arctic Plague. There's an employee at a theme park designed to provide euthanasia services via roller coaster. There is a painter on an interstellar starship. There is a deceased mother's robotic dog. Here. Telepathic organ donor pig. And present in many of these journeys are hints at another character whose journey began billions of years ago. But who that character is and how they fit into the novel is part of the underlying mystery that you'll need to discover. Through most of these intimate journeys across time and space, the story is ultimately about, a great big beating heart reaching through the dark and towards humanity's capacity to reimagine and reinvent themselves and find new community. So that's How High We Go in the Dark, coming January 2022.
I cannot wait. All right, Maurice.
Hello. Let's see. So Sweep of Stars is basically about an intergalactic Black-led community. It's a community that started off on the moon, expanded to include portions of Mars called Bronzeville, the Titan, a distant mining colony, and basically the story follows three sets of characters. So we have the Dreaming City, which is the capital of Muungano, which is the name of the community. The voice of that community has fallen, and so the community has to figure out who is going to speak for them now, and especially in light of aggression from OE, which is Original Earth. We have the Cipher, which is a research starship powered by jazz music, because. And it's been tasked with exploring the galaxy, and they've been sent to study this wormhole, which is within the community, which has been determined to be artificially created. And then we have the HOVA, which is the defensive forces, which have secretly gone through the wormhole, only to discover that they're not alone in the universe. So let's see. So Sweep of Stars, when I originally pitched it to tour, I was just like, it's Black Panther meets Game of Thrones in space. But then we've sort of, in the meantime, I've tightened it up a bit. So now I can just go, it's Black Panther meets The Expanse.
I mean, but everything is always better in space.
In space, so.
Right. All right, John.
Okay, everyone else is talking about these brilliant books that span super cool ideas and really just, and mine's about big monsters. Big monsters. That's what it does. That's what it is. It's the Kaiju Preservation Society. And people asked me, they were like, when I originally announced that it was called the Kaiju Preservation Society, and they were like, what do you mean by preservation? And I was like, well, I mean, I don't mean like pickling them, because the jar would just be huge. So instead, what it is that we're trying to save the kaiju, because as it turns out in my universe, kaiju are like the world's largest pandas, right? And we all know about pandas. We love pandas, but they're not the sharpest ursines on the shed. So, they need help to propagate, to continue on, and all that sort of stuff. And if you're not careful, they can do a lot of damage. And so we find out that the kaiju need a little help surviving. And so there's a group of people that go ahead and do that. But of course, when you have these super large creatures, people will start being like, well, we can actually use these for our own ends. And of course, when people start using large monsters for their own end, good can never come of it. So that's the other part of the Kaiju Preservation Society, keeping other people from making the kaiju everybody else's problem. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Big, big, big monsters. That's what I got. That's all I have for you. Everyone else here is super brilliant. I got monsters. I'm done.
I love monsters. I spend my evenings watching anything I can on Discovery Plus about cryptids. So I'm with you on the monsters.
Excellent.
All right, Dan.
Okay, so my book is called Sleepwalk. Here's a coffee cup with the cover. And it's about a guy named Will Bear. He's a laid-back 50-year-old mercenary who travels the country in his beloved RV named the Guiding Star with his rescue pit bull named Flip, doing odd, somewhat shady jobs for a shadowy corporation, ranging from meddling in local school board elections to trafficking in human organs. Will's life is on autopilot, driving where he's told, downing his steady morning microdose of LSD, responding to most people's remark with his standard right on, and occasionally crying for emotional hygiene reasons. But his sleepwalking life is upended when he receives a mysterious call from a young woman claiming to be his sperm donor daughter. So this is a comic road novel, a conspiracy thriller set in a collapsing near future America, but at its heart, it's a father-daughter relationship story that forces Will out of his comfort zone and into becoming an active participant in his own life. My comps are, let's say it's Nomadland meets The Big Lebowski with a light touch of the speculative and becoming less light as time goes on.
That's all right. I love that you have a mug. Adrian, we need mugs. I think we need mugs.
I was just over here like, so when's the mug part of this experience?
No, this is just, yeah, I'm just gonna give these to people as swag.
Yes.
Just casually drinks out of a mug with your own book cover on it.
No,
Just...
well.
Nice
All
work.
right. Adrian, speaking of you, let's hear it.
All right, so Grievers is the first novella in a trilogy about the weight of Black grief and what happens when it can't be carried anymore. It's a near future novel in Detroit. It's about Detroit, it's about Black cities, it's about the detritus of grief and the stories that get left behind when there's white flight or wealth flight or when people leave for whatever reason. And it's about what makes us want to keep going when we seem to have lost everything. And the protagonist is named Dune. She's a Detroiter whose mother is patient zero of a sickness that presents like traumatic grief. And we follow her both into her grief and out into the changing city. In terms of what it's like, it's in the lineage of Octavia E. Butler's parables. It's really like trying to be both about a Black woman, but about humanity, about being in changing circumstances, about directly being impacted and figuring out what is a practical way to move forward and what is a philosophical way forward. So I'm excited. I'm still very much in the world. So it's really cool to have the first novella out and be kind of immersed in this idea of there's no city that's ever a blank canvas anywhere. So how do we be with all the layers and layers and layers of life that are in these places?
Beautiful. And it was also such an amazing experience being your editor, Adrian. So thank you for that. And thank you for having Grievers be the first book in the Black Dawn series.
It's a great
we're really happy to have you. All right. So we are going to move on to our dinner conversations. So first up, we have Rebecca and Sequoia. So let's hear from y'all about your books and any questions you have for each other.
Great, wonderful. It's so nice to meet you, Rebecca. I've, part of my homework obviously was Googling you and reading about your work, which I'm super excited to read. And I love that you're, living in Palo Alto now, because I think that, it seems like elements of your novel are really sort of speaking to sort of the capitalist framework of our society, and not only near future technology and space and all these different ways that we might be able to address climate change or adapt to, what's to come, but how will corporations respond, and how will we, the ways that we communicate, how will those change in the future in a way that, is, I think, tied to, I guess, how we navigate the world. It seems like both of our novels kind of deal with kind of these issues of capitalist frameworks and tech. And obviously there's kind of this space aspect, I think, that's, I think, really heightened in your novel. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you imagined or researched the tech or near future elements? And especially given, the fact that you're in Palo Alto now, and I'm originally from the Bay Area, how grounded are they in what we're currently experiencing, both in terms of the relationship between corporations and the environment, and also how we communicate? Because I feel like right now whenever I look on the news, there's always something about whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, these corporations that are so ingrained, not only with our climate and the environment, but how we understand these ongoing issues.
So I started writing this book. I wrote the first 5 years of this book in Michigan, the next 2 years of this book outside Chicago, and then the last 2 years of writing this book here in Palo Alto, which is not a place I ever expected to live. And when I moved here, the California parts of the book and the parts about big tech and personal technology, and sort of the class strictures in the Bay Area and in Silicon Valley that I had never experienced in the same way. But there are the people who work in technology and the people who don't. And one of the messages of, I always think of my my brother-in-law, Tom. Whenever I recommend a book to him, he gets really frustrated at the end. He says, but what is the message of this? And so now sometimes when I'm writing, I think to myself, like, what is Tom going to get out of this? But I really don't believe that tech billionaires are going to save us. Tech billionaires are going to save themselves if and when they can understand that there is even a threat. Because what I see out here is a lot of people who feel that they don't have to do much in terms of climate change because their hope and their faith, in a way, is tied to technological innovations that have big money behind them. But those, I really don't believe, are ever going to benefit us and the people who need it most. So the book was really wrestling through those ideas that what happens when we're in a place where most people end up working for big tech in some way or another, because that's where the job is, you know? How do you do good work? How do you stay true to yourself and your ethics? And how do you do work that matters, not to your higher ups, but to down there? There's this refrain in my book about like, okay, but are we doing work for up here, the space station, or are we doing work that's going to matter down there, which is real life? And so, yes, when I read about major acts of philanthropy from billionaires who've made their billions by exploiting capitalist framework and exploiting people, it's like, well, you know, but where'd you get that money? So I hope that answers your question about how I'm trying to engage in these problems. Myself, I'm as grassroots as you get. I'm a native plant nut. When I say grassroots, I mean literal grassroots in terms of what I think that people can do to fight climate change. So the heroes in my book are never going to be people who are trying to, whose ambitions for fighting the good fight are based on recognition and power. They're going to be people who are content to make big changes with a tiny, tiny amount of power that they have.
I love that.
Did that answer your question?
You did. That was beautiful. And yeah, I mean, when I think I fled California to some degree, many years ago, and it's still considered home. But you're right. There's a very serious issue in terms of class, in the Bay Area. And it really wasn't until I lived in Iowa and places like that where I started to think more about where my food came from, about our relationship to the land, to the forests of the Pacific Northwest. Even though I was thousands of miles away, I started to think more about those issues because I was kind of forced to. Like I knew farmers, and you just don't have those kinds of relationships in a place like Silicon Valley.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I live in a bubble within a bubble out here because I'm surrounded by academics, but the academics are surrounded by the larger tech bubble in the Bay Area. So sometimes it feels like I really have to punch my way out. But I noticed it right away when I moved here, especially because of my kids, that the way people talk about success and their children is very different from the way that I think about success in my children. Like, I want them to grow up to be good citizens, and good friends. And that was also something that I was sort of dealing with and processing and exercising as I wrote this book is how do I raise children in this environment and prepare them for a future that I myself am not ready to face, et cetera. So my question for you is, I wrote this book for a little over 7 years. I heard you say, and I'd seen a reference to 10 years. We may have had a similar experience where you're writing the near future and it keeps catching up with you.
Mm-hmm.
because you have a plague book,
right,
that you started writing before we had a plague. So I would like to hear a little bit more about your experience of trying to write the near future and it's taking too long.
Yeah. So, well, first off, when my agent said that, like it was about time to send our book out and to, sell it, it was like the early days of COVID. I was like, oh my God, like what have I done? I was just super anxious. And so there were certain things that I had predicted that came to pass. And, kind of as I continued to write and edit, I definitely had to think about, well, what is the relationship I want the readers of the future, the readers that have experienced COVID, to have with my novel? Because I don't want them to wade in the moment. I want them to transcend it. Mm-hmm. So, I might have had to, think about, okay, so this seems a little bit too close. I'll kind of keep this detail. I think what helped me is something that you mentioned earlier. How do people kind of connect? How do you raise families? How do you live in a changed world? And so I was kind of thinking about that small facet. We already have Outbreak the movie. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to explore how lovers and friends and families have to reimagine grief and how they move on, this week, next year, and a generation later, in terms of holding on to memory and remembering those we've lost. And that's something that, certainly people have had to do, over the past few years or past couple of years, because they weren't able to maybe grieve in a normal way because of quarantines, or they weren't able to sit by their loved ones at a hospital. And I thought about, well, how does that send ripples throughout the future in terms of, creating new practices? And how might, thinking about capitalism again, how would corporations exploit grief, exploit, there's, for example, the mortuary corporations in my novel have their own cryptocurrencies, and they have banks. They really kind of
cryptocurrency
in the culture. But generations later, we also see communities, having communal urns and entire neighborhoods remembering their ancestors in kind of holodeck-like simulations. And that's something that, I guess there's a lot of optimism despite the plague in my book. And I really wanted to reimagine and think about, well, what are the technologies, what are kind of the new practices of the future that would kind of be more hopeful as we kind of move past this moment?
Did you have moments, I think when I first started writing my book, the personal technology that ended up becoming like an embedded personal computer that sees out your eyes was originally like a glorified Fitbit.
Yeah.
Because things were moving too fast for me to catch up. Were there any things like that with your book where you started?
There was an early chapter that was in an internet cafe. And then I had to I scaled that up to become a virtual cafe where you're kind of in these immersive environments. So I basically gave them a kind of like a sort of like a souped up Oculus.
Yeah.
Because, internet cafes just seem so archaic right now.
You have to just keep pressing fast forward.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had to kind of create, okay, what would social media look like in, 10 years or 30 years from now? What would it be called? What kind of devices would we have to access that? I was thinking about implants, things that would be a little bit more immersive and interactive.
Yeah. I mean, you asked me and I failed to answer about how grounded is this research. I read that Margaret Atwood said somewhere that there's nothing in any of her books that isn't already underway. And that's also how I tried to think about it. It sounds like how you tried to think about it too. Sometimes people will send me an email that says, this thing you wrote about is really happening. I'm like, yeah, that's what I said.
I mean, the Sony Aibo was rebooted not that long ago, and I kind of used part of my advance money to buy one.
Yeah.
And, the robot dog in my novel is a little bit more advanced, but I saw it as a technological artifact that could actually be a vehicle for connecting two people, like a father and a son, because the robot dog contains the only recorded audio of their mother that died.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, how can these devices kind of reinstill my hope for humanity in a way that sometimes I feel like when I'm on Twitter, it's kind of the exact opposite.
Well, your book sounds absolutely incredible. I have more that I would love to ask you about, but sounds like we're going to move on to Chaon and Maurice. So I can't wait to read it. Thank you.
Same with you.
I'm so excited for everyone's books. And Sequoia, I have a follow-up question for you, and I think Adrian as well later, about writing about plagues and then a plague happens. So we'll get to that later. But right now, let's hear from John and Maurice.
Oh, hello, Maurice. How are you?
Why, hello, John. How are you?
I'm spectacular. So for everybody who doesn't know, obviously, Maurice and I know each other fairly well. I believe we met at Confusion, which is a convention in Michigan. Is that correct, Maurice, or am I wrong about that?
No, we actually met before that, technically, because I think you would come to Indianapolis for a local convention, and we bumped into each other in the bathroom.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. I was a substitute. I was a substitute guest of honor because the guest of honor that year, I don't know, fell down a well or something. And at the last minute, they're like, we need somebody. It could be you. Do you want to do this? And I was like, yes, I will be the guest of honor for the team. And the one thing I remember about meeting you, and basically every time I meet you, is like, you go to a convention and I'm no different. You know, you got your sarcastic t-shirt and you got your jeans, all that sort of stuff. Man, you always look so damn good. You've got like carmine paisleys and stuff. You are the fashion plate of the century for science fiction and fantasy. And and every time I see you, I'm like, of course, Maurice, best looking, best dressed man in this entire place.
But to be fair, my family actually staged a clothing intervention on me about a year ago. So things have changed a little bit. So they're like, we need you to tone it down a little. So I'm like, okay, that's fair.
I mean, but if you can't do that at a science fiction convention, where can you do it?
Yeah.
But more importantly, jazz-powered spaceships. Come on, you need to tell me more about this because I need to know.
Okay, all right. Well, so part of that, couple things led up to this. So one, I was sort of, thinking through this whole idea. All right, actually, I'll back up because so I'm the resident Afrofuturist at the Kepler Institute, right here in Indianapolis. And so we're like a grassroots organization. We do a lot of work in the community. We train up young leaders and that sort of thing. And so like one of the skill sets that we've been trying to pass on to the young leaders is this whole idea of improvisation, right? And so we had gone on this long thing about improv, and me and one of the co-founders of the organization, he was going on about his love of Sun Ra. And so I was like, so then that's when I just went down a Sun Ra rabbit hole, to be honest with you. And then I was just like, oh yeah, improv, the power of improv. And, it can power a lot of things like starships. Absolutely like starships, because that's where my brain goes, like training up young people, let's power some starships. It's a natural continuum.
Sure.
So I originally wrote a novella. I like to experiment with these ideas first before I throw them into a book. So I experimented with it in a novella, and I was just like, oh man, I like this. I like the way this is shaping up. And so then I was like, all right, I'm gonna expand this out in the book. It's like, all right, so, and plus I need an excuse to go, doing some starfaring. So I'm like, yeah, one of these jazz-powered starships, that should work.
That should work. This should be. But you just said something that I think is really interesting. You were sort of joking. It's like working with the kids, powering starships. But I think that it's actually really important, the connection between kids and YA and speculative fiction and shaping the future. I think that that there is, in fact, a natural progression from one to the other.
Oh, absolutely. That's actually how the book came about, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Because, in fact, I'm going to toss Adrienne Maree Brown under the bus, too, while I'm at it. because her book Emergent Strategy actually put to words how our organization works.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually one of our core texts that when we're bringing in people, we walk them through that book so they can get a feel for how we do this work in community. And so at one point, I just sort of thinking through, what is it we're actually building toward? Because there's so many times when, we're doing this work and we're so much about survival, we forget to give ourselves room to dream about things and dream about future possibilities. And so that's why I started doing. I was like, all right, let's start dreaming for what we could do. What's the world we're trying to create? And so I took about a year and a half and just started talking to folks about that, talking to the young people, talking to some of the elders and going, if we could rebuild the world on our terms, like scorched earth, we could build institutions from the ground up. What could they look like? Right. And that's how I ended up doing the world building for Sweep of Stars. And it was interesting because I think, like I said, I think of it as dreaming alongside community. Mm-hmm. But then just that whole act of dreaming alongside community and then how it impacted the work. And then I'm watching the work now being transformed. And then I'm writing being impacted by that work. And so it becomes this, cycle that sort of feeds on itself. So I've been loving it.
The thing that I really like about you, and you were mentioning community and how you integrate community into science fiction, you seem to be, at least in my experience of you, just a real community builder. You have your own convention, MoCon. You do your own convention every year. Yes. But that is a perfect example of what I mean by you are just such a community builder. And it seems to me that the natural extension from the community building, moving into imagining the futures with community.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, MoCon basically started as, I have this community in my speculative fiction family. Sure. I have them, but I have this local writing community, and I bought these local community organizers. Now, how can I share my friends? How can I introduce my friends? I got all these cool people over here, and with all these cool people over here, and how can we just have excuses to get together? And that's what it was about. The whole thing is about, building community in all the different spaces that we move in.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because ultimately, when we're telling stories about people, and the whole idea of the communities that you come from, the communities that you build, the communities that you create for others, I think is at the core of the science fiction that we do.
Yes, absolutely. Although, okay, so now you said that writing about people is what we do, right? So here's my dilemma with you, John. Yeah, I'm a little bit upset with you. I mean, I did not know I was going to have a chance to talk to the most popular science fiction writer of our generation.
No, one of the most.
One of. That's not the way I heard it, John. That's not the way I heard it. So here's my dilemma. All right, so because as you know, John, you're a role model for me.
Oh, okay.
Right. And I'm in the middle of writing this intergalactic trilogy.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking to myself, all right, so John, he's just finished this New York Times bestselling series. This New York Times, it's a space trilogy at that.
Yep.
And I'm doing that too. And I want to pitch a Kaiju in the Hood novel to my agent. But now John's already beat me to this. Well, he's beat me to the Kaiju part anyway. But I'm kind of curious, what does that thought process look like? Where it's like, what? I've written about space and I've been in this world for 3 books. You know what I need to do next? Giant monsters. What? Talk me through that process.
It was completely unrelated. 2020, I was trying to write a completely different novel. It was going to be a dark political novel. And turns out 2020 is a really bad year to write a dark political novel. So I junked that. And at the last minute, my brain was like, oh, while you were freaking out about that book you didn't write, I was thinking about Kaiju, and it downloaded in my brain. And let me tell you this, Maurice, and we're going to end on this because we have to move on.
Okay.
That you absolutely need to write your kaiju novel. Just because I've written one does not mean that you can't, that you shouldn't, and that you won't write your own. Because you're writing a space opera and I wrote space opera. Your space opera is different from my space opera. Your kaiju is going to be different from my kaiju, and your kaiju is going to be awesome. So you need to do it. This is my commandment to you as your idol. Do it.
Oh, wait, that's how you heard my compliment? Idol? That's where you went with that compliment? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
This interview's done. This interview's done. We can move on.
Okay, well, I definitely do want to hear a kaiju or read a kaiju from Maurice. So please write that so that we can all read it. And then you and John can have a much longer dinner conversation. It'll just be y'all. It'll just be y'all and kaiju. All right, so we're gonna move on to Adrian and Dan.
You gotta put up my, hello.
Hi.
Where are you? I don't
I'm
see you.
here.
Oh, okay.
Floating.
No, I was going to tell you, you were at Clarion in 2015.
Yes.
And I was there 2 years later. I was teaching there 2 years later, and I was so sad I missed you.
So we just missed in the Clarion Interverse.
I know. But you know, you sounded so bashful when you said, "No, this is my first fiction." But you've been writing fiction for a long time.
I've been writing fiction. I've been like submitting stories. I maybe feel like I've always been writing fiction, but this is my first long form thing to be published. And I've been writing this work since 2011. So
nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I mean, I know
which means I'm daunted to be talking.
I know Sanina wanted to talk about. I know Sanina wanted to talk about the whole thing of writing a plague novel and then having a plague happen.
Yes.
So I'll let maybe we could talk about that. But I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about how I'm so in awe of all of the stuff that you're doing with. I mean, you're a social activist. You have 2 podcasts. You have a best-selling book, The Hilarious Pleasure Activism, and you have an anthology, and you're a doula. According to your wiki page, is that true?
It is true. Although now I mostly do postpartum doula work. Like I don't because I just don't want to be on call the same way.
Right,
but like
right.
Both people just had little ones in my life that I'm like supporting and running meal trains for and doing other work for. So
but how has fiction sort of fit into this very active life? Because I don't do anything. I mean, I really
don't do anything. Okay, good.
I mean, retired.
I'm trying to get like you, so I mean, I think that the way it fits in right now is it takes me a really long time to box out the space to actually get immersed in a different world, which is part of why I finally gave in and just wrote about the world I was in. So Grievers is very intimate. It's very much about the world of people who are trying to create change in Detroit, who I got the blessing of getting to be immersed in that realm for over a decade and was deeply moved by the people I met and the lessons I learned, and from both the people and the city. Like Detroit has a sentience, it has its own personality and intensity and survivor wisdom.
I loved it. I mean, I'm from Cleveland, or I have lived in Cleveland forever, and I mean, it's there's something about the city that has such a spirit and such like an ancient spirit to it too. Yeah. I love that cover, by the way, just that sense of like,
thank you.
Like the organic world emerging.
Actually.
Yeah.
It's like it's how pretty that is.
It's so gorgeous. There's a lot of Cleveland that looks a little like that too.
I think there's a lot of, like, Detroit has a lot of sisters, I think of it as like a city with a lot of sisters, and a lot of people have been reaching out to me like, oh, this feels like it could be all these other places too that have gone through this kind of transformation.
But you've lived everywhere. You've lived in Germany. I guess you grew up in Germany, is that right?
Yeah, half of my childhood was in Germany.
then, you know, obviously New York and California and Georgia, and you're in Durham now. But so what made Detroit seem like, what is it about Detroit that drew you and made it seem like that? I mean, it seems like it's almost a character in the novel.
Oh, it's definitely, yeah. It's like, I mean, I think that if out of all those places I'd lived, I'd never lived in a place that was majority Black. I'd always lived in places where whatever identities I was a part of was a part of the minority of that place, or that's how it was thought of. And when I first started visiting Detroit, I remember getting off the airplane the first time and being like, wow, everyone's Black. Like everybody's Black. Everyone, the people who are biking are Black, and the organic food people are Black, and the moms with strollers are Black. Like everybody's Black. And it was so intriguing for me as it was healing. It felt like a healing experience for me to be in that space and not have, it's not like racism is not there. It's not like all the issues. In fact, in some ways they're heightened because everything gets clarified when you see, oh, like, you know, what do white people do in this environment? What do wealthy people do in this environment? But there's something about a city, many of these cities that people have migrated to, have found, you know, it was the last stop on the Underground Railroad for one of the pathways, right? It's a place that people thought of as like, we will go there to be free. We will go realize our dreams there. And then to go to a place that realized a lot of dreams, and then because of capitalism, experienced a ton of crashes, and it keeps cycling through. And one of my mentors, who is the epigraph of that book, Grace Lee Boggs, you know, one of the things she always says was, Detroit is what the rest of the country has to look forward to. I felt that a lot when I was living there. I was like, this city is an American city. It's an American story. And I feel like one of the places, maybe, you know, we can tete-a-tete here, but when I was reading about you, I was going and doing all my research, and I first of all, I want to read everything. I was just like, your work is astounding. And it feels like we cover such similar territory, like trying to tell the whole American story through the interior of one kind of loner, right? But there's a way that, as I was reading especially about Sleepwalk, which I'm like, oh, I really need to read this book. In the telling of it, you're talking about America in this near future. And the reviewer says it'll give us chills of dread and recognition, which is like goals, right? Like that's how we want to write it. But I wanted to ask you, do you feel like you write American dystopia as a warning? Do you feel like you write it as an inevitability? Like, what is it about dystopian near future that intrigues you?
I think it's trying to understand what the world is coming towards, and trying to understand also the sort of transformations that could possibly change things, maybe. I mean, I do think, you know, like in some ways my book is like that meme that you know, where there's the dog sitting in the burning house, and the dog is saying, this is fine.
I know exactly what you mean.
And I feel like that's where my character starts, is, you know, I mean, and it's sort of like all of this terrible stuff is sort of happening on the periphery of the book, and he's just driving along, you know, and, you know, there's militias, and there's, you know, martial law, and all this stuff is happening, and he's just sort of going about his day, microdosing and hanging out with his dog. And then there's this personal connection that happens, and he has to sort of like become human. Right.
That's right.
That's right. And there's a lot of this book for me that's about, you know, I was adopted as an infant. I was in foster care for a little while, but I mean, I didn't meet my biological family until much later in my life. And there was something that was, you know, about that I really wanted to write about this sort of weird connection that one feels to the ancestors of and the people that you are blood related to. Yes. And I really wanted to sort of try to find a way to talk about that without, you know, getting sappy or whatever. So that, you know, this guy's sort of a clown, but he finds sort of his humanity by making this connection with this with this daughter that he didn't know he had.
Well, I'm really grateful for it. I feel, if you read my book, you'll see it's also a stoner loner dog book in a way. And I think the similarities of trying to be normal people, good people, and then the external circumstances shift or a massive truth is revealed and then everything has to change. That happens to everyone. That happens to everyone. So I really love that it's not like superheroes that change happens to. It's like everyday people trying to make their way. So
no, and I think it's not the dystopia in my book, and I think the dystopia in our world is not like raging zombies and stuff. It's just this slow accretion of loss.
That's right.
That
apocalypse.
Yeah, it's there's a lot. The main character keeps talking about having a slow realization over his lifetime, and I think that's what's who knows, maybe the Gulf Stream will go to shit and things will collapse immediately, but
right now we're just the frogs.
Right now we're just sort of on on the mystery ride through the tunnel of love, but it's not love, it's doom, and it's sort of a slow train wreck, and that's what was really, I was trying to find a way to talk about that without screaming.
I'm like, I always scream, but yeah.
I'm always internally screaming. I think I woke up screaming this morning. But I loved everyone's conversations together. We're gonna open things up to the audience now in case anyone have any questions, or in case after listening to all of these, we have questions for each other. And Dan brought up my question for Sequoia and Adrian. And what is it for anyone who has written a pandemic or plague novel, and then we get into this global Pandora's box? Like, how was that experience for you?
Well, I will say one of the things that gives me permission to write anything is to release the idea that I'm going to be before or after anything that's ever happened, right? Like plagues and pandemics are happening all the time. It's just scale. It's questions of scale. People are grieving all the time. So it's questions of scale. And what was intriguing to me was what builds up, like not what continues cycling, but what builds up inside of that continuation. Like if you think about dialectical humanism, it's like we're moving along the same journey, but we're different every time. And I was like, what would have to change for humans to respond to pandemic differently, to respond to plague differently than we have? And so in some ways it was great to be like, look, there we are responding the way we always do. And as each micro negative response happened and I was finishing the book, I was like, I really want to articulate something else. Like, this is inspiring me, because I'm like, look, that's bullshit. We need to do this other thing. So yeah, I felt calm in that, but I'm curious, Sequoia, for you, like.
I agree that, like, it's not something that, certainly COVID's new, but there have been plagues before. And my plague was climate related. There's also kind of otherworldly things going on as well, but, it was, effectively unleashed because of global warming and because of the melting permafrost. And, so we have been grieving for a long time with regards to what we're doing to the planet, to the future that we may have. I'm also a professor, and I teach a climate fiction class every year, and I've been seeing the narrative for my students, kind of their outlook on the future change over the years. Like at first, several years ago, it's like, we're going to stop this. We're going to stop climate change. We're going to save the planet, and that stopped. It's evolved into like, well, the world's going to be pretty terrible, and we need to think about issues of equity and we need to think about who's going to be the most screwed, and we need to think about how we can mitigate, what we've already done. So there's wildfires in my novel, there's all these things, and I sort of see that as an extension of the plague. But I think what helped me write this and certainly edit it during a pandemic, because I really had to kind of, go through the weeds, in 2020 and 2021, was that my future reimagined communities, and thought about how, and we see this, certainly there are a lot of things that are depressing about how we've reacted to COVID, and like a large scale tragedy like this, but there are also some really beautiful moments of communities coming together, of people actually having dialogues about we need to help each other out. And, I chose to lean into that in my book and think about what are some of the small kind of grassroots ways, neighborhood ways that we can see ourselves through a tragedy like this. And, it was something that I think was cathartic for me. I think, people might assume that it was, it would be kind of a depressing experience writing and editing this during, 2020, 2021, but I found it to be oddly healing in thinking about, what next year and what 30 years from now might look like.
Yeah, I have to say, just on that piece, I found it similarly like healing and relieving to not have to pretend to focus on anything other than it's like, this is what is, and this is what I want to write about, and this is what I'm feeling, and this is who I'm grieving, and let's go. So that'll be true. I mean, like, COVID's continuing and I get to keep working in this trilogy series, but I'm like, I wonder what'll happen with the next thing I try to write. And I'm like, yeah.
Amazing. I actually have a question just for, I suppose, all of the authors here. What draws you to speculative fiction?
Money.
Any?
I fell into science fiction. I sat down to write my first novel, and I couldn't decide whether to write a mystery book or a science fiction book. So I literally flipped a coin, and it came up on heads, which was science fiction. And then I sold the book, and then they said, you have to write another book. So I sold another book, and it just was a slippery slope from there. So that's kind of how I got started. I mean, obviously I had written and before, but also, the further you go into it and the more competent you become in the field of it, the more you find that you can do within it to address issues that people might not think are actually science fictional at all. Relationships, characters, communities, all of these things you can do while you're also writing about spaceships and apocalypses and kaiju or whatever. And that's the great secret of speculative fiction, is that you may get into it for whatever reason, but you find that the world becomes infinite as you're writing about infinite worlds.
I love that answer, because I started off my career as a horror writer, and I realized that was me, frankly, just using literature or using the genre to process my anger. And I had a lot to be angry about, and it came out a lot. And I had a 10-year horror career just processing anger, it felt like. But it's interesting that, when I started transitioning into fantasy and science fiction especially, it's like there was a different part of me that unlocked. And it's like, suddenly it's like I'd given myself permission to like dream about things. And I realized that how much of my life has just been a failure to dream in some ways, and how that's just such a lost skill. And so that's one thing that I love about it, what draws me to it, and what I try and pass on to my students is that whole re-engagement with the idea of dreaming and that, hey, you know what, I'm a professional daydreamer now. That's what I do. And because I'm accessing that space, I look at my students, and they are, each of them, they're like a multiverse of possibilities. And that's the eyes through which I see them now. My students, my children, the community, it's now, I just see through this lens of just possibility. And I love that about speculative fiction.
Rebecca, You had your hand up.
What drew me to speculative fiction, which is a major departure from my first novel, was motherhood. And that I was pregnant and I was freaking out. And I kept trying to imagine the world in front of me and the world in front of the child that I was bringing into that world. And that drew me to start deeply imagining that future. There's a teenager in the book that is almost the same age as my son will be at that time. And that arose from me trying to imagine, but also process those anxieties. Yeah. The near future in the book, and then the near future in your house that's short people.
And that makes so much sense, that like you really start thinking about the future when you're thinking about someone else's future. Like,
right.
What is this world going to look like for them?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's beautiful. But we do have to go now, unfortunately. I wish we could talk so much longer. Everyone's enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. We all have so many things to say. But anyone who's interested can always look at Heartland's next events coming up, and that has been put in the chat. You can also go to Heartland's website to look at events. And anyone who is interested in Black Dawn, definitely go to AK Press's website and check out Black Dawn. You can check out Adrienne Maree Brown and the next book coming up in Grievers, which we will be talking about and releasing a date for that shortly. And if you have any other questions about Black Dawn, AK Press, you can email AK_fiction_submissions@akpress.org. It was so wonderful talking to everyone here today and hearing everyone's conversations. I think we should do this again. I saw something in the chat that said they want us all here together again. So maybe we can make it happen. Good luck to all the authors and your books. And I can't wait to read them all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in and share the love that has been shared here today. I knew this was going to be an insightful and moving group of authors, and you really did bring it. I would like to recommend, can we all go out quickly? Sanina, can you list all the authors and have each author list their favorite local indie bookstore as we wrap up the event?
Sure thing. So we had Rebecca Scherm.
My favorite local bookstore where I am now is Books Inc., the oldest independent bookstore in the West. But my home bookstore is Literati in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
All right. Sequoia Nagamotsu.
I'm going to say Moon Palace Books here in Minneapolis.
All right. John Scalzi.
My local independent bookstore, Jay and Mary's Book Center. They're great.
Okay. Maurice Bratis.
I'm going to say the Ujamaa Community Bookstore, which coincidentally is run by my sister.
Keep it in the family. Dan Sean.
Max Backs, paperbacks on Coventry Road in Cleveland Heights.
All right. And Adrienne Maree Brown.
Absolutely have to say the Source Booksellers in Detroit, Michigan, baby.
Also keeping it in the family, the chosen family.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Again, thank you so much and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you. Thanks for this amazing hosting.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.